This is going to be a review for the Chapter 3 test that we're taking tomorrow, October 4th, I believe it'll be, on Friday. I'm just going to basically go through the presentation we did in class where we talked about the key points that you're going to see on the test. Beginning with the 5 climate regions, what you'll be given is an example of a climate region, explaining its definition and where you find it, and you'll need to give me the name. So you need to know that a tropical climate region is found near the equator. It's warm to hot all year round. You'll need to know that polar climate regions are found near the north and south poles, and it's cold year round there. Temperate climate region is found in the middle latitudes, in other words, between the tropical regions and the polar regions. And in temperate climate regions, we have hot summers and cold winters, a change of seasons. We live here in Portage. We are in a temperate climate region. We get all 4 seasons, change of weather throughout the year, so that's temperate. You need to know that a dry climate region has very little precipitation, which is just a fancy word for rain. They generally have hot days and cool nights, so basically we're talking about desert areas. And we find dry climate regions on the west coast of continents and in the interior parts of continents. So, for example, the middle of Australia, the interior of the continent of Australia, is basically one big dry climate region. Along the west coast of the United States, we have some desert areas, some dry climate region areas. All along the west coast of South America, we have dry climate regions. And then finally, we have the highland climate region, and this is a climate region that's found all throughout the world, wherever you have mountains. High land, mountains, they kind of go together. And in a highland climate region, temperatures and precipitation, again, which is rainfall, is going to vary based on how high up in altitude or elevation you are. And those words, altitude and elevation, simply mean how high up the mountain you are. The higher you climb in the mountain, the cooler it's going to get. If you go up high enough, even if down on the ground it's in the 60 or 70 degree range, you can go high enough up a mountain to where it's in the 30s and there's still snow at the top of the mountain. So make sure you know those 5 climate regions. Make sure you can match up the name of the climate region with the descriptions that I gave. Another aspect of the test is knowing the difference between weather and climate. Climate is an area's average temperature and precipitation over a long period of time. For example, if I say Portage has cold, snowy winters and cool, wet falls, I'm talking about climate. That's sort of a big picture kind of thing. If I say the weather in San Diego is 75 degrees and sunny most days all year round, again, I'm talking about climate because I'm talking about the big overall picture. What the weather is like, what the rainfall is like, what the temperatures are like on a year-round basis. Weather, on the other hand, is simply talking about an area's temperatures and precipitation right now or over the next few days. So weather is more immediate. It's what's happening today or what's going to happen tomorrow or maybe over the weekend with temperatures and with precipitation or rainfall. So some examples would be if I say it's 66 degrees and raining today, or if I say the forecast for Saturday is 80 degrees and windy. Those are both examples of weather because I'm talking about something that's immediate, that's right now, either today or in a couple of days. So the way you'll see this on the test is I'll give you an example. The example might say, in Fort Myers, Florida, it is warm all year round. That would be an example of climate because I'm describing Fort Myers' weather conditions for the entire year. If, on the other hand, I say, today in Boulder, Colorado, it was 40 degrees and raining, that would be a great example of weather because I'm talking about what happened today in Boulder, Colorado. The things that affect weather. Sun has a huge impact on weather and climate. The rays of the sun provide heat to the earth. The equator gets the most direct sunlight, and so it's warm all year round. The poles, once again, I'm meaning the north and south poles, they get the least direct sunlight because of the way the earth is curved, and so they're cold year round. The sun also has an effect on climate based on which part of the earth is tilted towards the sun at different times of the year. In the wintertime, the northern hemisphere that we live in is pointed away from the sun, is tilted away from the sun. So, once again, we get less direct sunlight, so we get cooler weather. During the summer months, the Earth, at that time of its orbit of the sun, the northern hemisphere is tilted towards the sun, So we get more direct sunlight, we get more heat, and that's why we have warmer weather conditions. Water affects climate and weather. Large bodies of water like Lake Michigan. Sorry about that little interruption. Large bodies of water like Lake Michigan take a long time in the spring to warm back up after a cold winter, and in the fall they take a long time to cool back down after a hot summer. And we all know the examples I gave in class today. When you go to make ice cubes in an ice cube tray, when you put that ice cube tray in the freezer, you expect that it's going to take an hour or two to have ice cubes. You don't expect it to be ice within seconds. When you go to boil water to make mac and cheese, you don't expect the water to boil in a minute. You know it's going to take 10 or 15 minutes. Well, a really large body of water like Lake Michigan, you just have to multiply that out in a much bigger scale. So in the fall that we're entering right now, the water in Lake Michigan is as warm as it's going to get because of the nice hot summer we had. It's going to take a number of weeks, if not a month or two, for it to cool down as the weather cools down. Now, what that means to the weather of the land around it is, if I'm at Lake Michigan in the fall, even if here in Portage by school, let's say it's a 50-degree day, if I go to Lake Michigan and walk along the shoreline, it might be closer to 60 degrees because the warm water is warming up the air on the land that's right next to it. Likewise, in the spring, on a nice warm spring day, one of the first warm spring days, if I go to Lake Michigan and walk along the shoreline, it might feel 8 or 10 degrees cooler. Because again, the water is still cold from the winter, and so it's cooling off the air and the land that's right next to it. Two more factors. Wind. There are big winds that blow for hundreds of miles that move weather systems around the world. That's how the weatherman makes his forecast. He's able to look and see, let's say, what's happening weather-wise in Colorado or Iowa, and he knows that the prevailing winds are bringing that weather towards Portage, Indiana, or Chicago. Ocean currents move warm water that's by the equator up towards the North Pole or the South Pole, and those same ocean currents will take cold water from the North and South Pole and move them back towards the equator. So ocean currents, again, are moving warm water from the equator towards the poles, cold water from the poles back towards the equator. It keeps that water mixed up. And the thing that we need to keep in mind as far as weather is concerned, if you're on the west coast of the United States, California, Oregon, Washington State, they have a nice warm ocean current that's bringing water from the equator, warm water, past those states up to the North Pole. So as all that warm water flows along the Pacific Ocean, it keeps the land inside of, or that's alongside of the Pacific Ocean nice and warm. That's why California is so nice year-round. That's why even up in Washington State, which is pretty far north in our country, they don't have really cold winters. They don't have a lot of snow in the winter, at least along the coastline, because that warm water keeps the land inland of the water pretty nice. It keeps the air pretty warm. Renewable resources. Natural resources that we cannot use up, we will never run out of them. Things like wind power, water power, trees, water itself, biomass, which is decomposing garbage, solar power. Resources that the earth gives us that we're not going to use up. We're not going to use the sun up. We can't use up water. Those are renewable resources. We can use them over and over and over again. In contrast, we also have non-renewable resources. And these are resources that will eventually run out of. They're things like the fossil fuels that we rely on the most in the world right now. Things like coal, petroleum, and natural gas. Most of the power that we use on Earth today comes from one of those three sources. We're eventually, maybe in your lifetime, maybe in your children's lifetime, but we're eventually going to run out of those types of fuels. So we have scientists, as we saw in the video we watched earlier this week, there are scientists, engineers, inventors all over the world who are constantly trying to create new sources of power that are going to lead us into the future once these other sources run out. Some more vocab words that are going to appear on the test. Make sure you know that a fossil fuel is fuels from the earth like coal, oil, and natural gas. We will eventually run out of them. Remember that the word extinct means when an animal or a plant dies out, there's no more of them, they're gone from the earth. Habitat are the plants, animals, climate, and landforms that surround the place where something lives. So an animal's habitat is all of those things that are around where it lives. Prevailing winds, I mentioned a little bit earlier, those are the large winds that blow for hundreds of miles, moving weather around the earth. If you want to know more about prevailing winds, just watch your local weather forecast for a week on Channel 7 or Channel 9. You'll hear the weatherman every day talking about the prevailing winds, bringing cold air from Canada or hot air up from the Gulf of Mexico. And as you watch that, you really will start to get a picture, looking at the maps that he shows, of how these winds move weather around. And finally, the ocean currents. Streams of surface water that move warm water from the equator to the poles and cold water from the poles to the equator. The test is pretty straightforward tomorrow. If you know the things I just went through, the things that are on your study guide, you're going to do great. Make sure that you watch this video once or twice. Make sure you have someone at home quiz you over your study guide. The test is about 20 questions long. It's not going to take you a long time to do it. And if you know these things, you're going to do a great job on the test.